now, folks, here we are, season 2 finale of 6 Reels Deep. And we will be closing things off with, believe it or not, CC's pick for the best horror film to come out over the past 25 years, Neil Marshall's The Descent. So, in preparation for my list, I watched that film that was on my honorable mention, and in that review, in that episode, let's just say, I wrongfully said, well, I should say I wrongfully said that, it was going to have a re-release in American theaters, but actually it's going to be coming out in UK and Irish theaters, right? I believe it's in November, early November, if I'm not mistaken, right? But to me, that shouldn't be an excuse not to not talk about the show, because this is kind of brilliant. This is a masterpiece in my opinion, right? So for me, right, just as we always do with these pre-rambles, right, just have to talk about where we were when we first saw the film, right? So for me, from what I can remember, this was not shown theatrically in Trinidad. So I sort of found this out through YouTube reviews, right? Certain YouTube film critics will come out and say, The Descent is, this great movie and you should check this out, right? And I think leading up to the end of the 2000s, it started, well, I should say at the time when it came out in 2005, it showed up in people's best of lists, right? But especially in 2009, right? That's when it started popping up in people's best of the decade lists, right? And this was around the time when I started getting deep into Facebook, right? Like I always had an account, but I just used to go on it ever so often, right? But here I was like, what? Instead of just me putting up just random pics of myself or, just selfies or whatnot, or I think this was before selfies or before the selfie era, if you will. Let me just do something that, believe it or not, was inspired by one of my, creative inspirations. That would be the late great Roger Ebert, because on his website he had a segment called Great Movies, right? So he would update this up until his death in 2012, right? So this is where he would just cover all the new films and just pretty much just do a retrospective review of those films, right? So technically you could say what he did here, what Roger Ebert did with that Great Movies section of his website, pretty much is the inspiration behind Retrospect reviews and 6 Reels Deep, right? Just this idea of recapping films and, talking about it with a fresh perspective, right? But I came up with the idea of, here as well, let me just make a photo album on Facebook, and it's just going to be about the best movies that I saw in the 2000s, right? So one of those films was The Descent, which I saw a few times leading up to the creation of that photo album. And it's a show that I absolutely enjoyed, but admittedly, it wasn't a show that I got back to in the 2010s, or I should say up until now, with this movie, turning 20 years old, right? But as I said before, this was not shown theatrically, so I just sort of found out about it online. I had to torrent it because, it wasn't available online, right? Sorry, it wasn't available theatrically, right? And I don't think, you have to remember, folks, this is pre-COVID, right? I don't think it was even available on pirate DVD neither. So I literally had to scour the 7 seas to find this thing, right? But cut to 2020 now, right? And I'll never forget, right? So IndieWire puts out their top 100 best horror films of all time, right? And it is still a list that I go to, especially around spooky season. So I always go there what movie haven't I seen for the longest while? Or what movie do I need to see, right? Whether it's a classic or a contemporary film, right? I always go to that list, right? So it's a go-to list, right? And I think that film, The Descent, is number 95 or somewhere between 90 and 100, right? Remember, this is a ranked list, right? So I'm not saying that, this movie doesn't deserve to be in that top category, but it's look, it's on your list. I don't care. It rightfully deserves to be there, right? And in preparation for this list, I looked up some top horror films of the past 25 years, and it would also show up there as well, right? But to me, I mean, yes, it's rightfully deserved because I think that it is a brilliant horror film, right? For me, it's a prime example of this white-knuckle, claustrophobic, holy shit, what was that? Bleak-ass, hopeless-ass horror filmmaking, though, because, this show is bleak AF just from the music that they
Oof.
use from the start to the end. Though it's just like, yes, folks, this is gonna be bleak, and we're gonna get away with this. We're gonna get away with this because this is not just a horror film. This is not just a creature feature, but it's a survival horror movie as well. So yes, characters are gonna die. Anyhow, you're gonna take it. Characters are gonna be put emotionally and physically through the ringer. Anyhow, you take it because it's that type of film, folks. I'm sorry, that's what it is, right? And that to me is why I enjoy that. Enjoy that film, right? So there's a couple of points I just want to make before we get to Ricardo's, introductory film, right? So for me, in preparation for our chat here, I rewatched. This is also a show I haven't seen in a long while. Neil Marshall's debut feature, that will be 2002's Dog Soldiers, right? And I'll talk about this in my review of the film here, right? What I would just say right out of the gate, though, is that Dog Soldiers and The Descent makes for a brilliant double feature. And I love how both shows sort of complement each other. I would argue and say that they sort of like mirror images of each other in various ways, but I'll get to that in my review. But yeah, though, just those two films, though, was just Neil coming out and saying, listen, I want to be the next Sam Raimi. You know what I mean? I just want to make, great horror films. And in a way, you could kind of see Dog Soldiers and The Descent as his Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, right? Dog Soldiers is him with a low budget, or I don't wanna say low budget. I don't mean that in a demeaning way, right? But it's not like a Hollywood level amount of money that he had.
No,
right?
no, yeah.
But it was just him being economical in terms of blocking and the creature effects and the costumes, and because yes, the werewolves in the film, some of them are actors and costumes and whatnot, right? But is the practical stuff, and where I put the camera and all these kind of things. It's just how he does that, though. It really evokes that same energy that Sam Raimi brought with his first Evil Dead movie, right? And The Descent feels like, you know what, I learned from that film. I have a bigger budget now. I'm going to be more ambitious here. And you're really going to see how talented, of a filmmaker I am, right? So yeah, just like Evil Dead 1 and 2, Dog Soldiers, and especially Descent now feels like, yeah, this is a character. This is a filmmaker who has really grown, who's really shown just how talented he is of a filmmaker, right? Yeah, his career didn't really flounder. It didn't really evolve the way you would have expected to. I mean, yeah, he made a couple of really great Game of Thrones episodes. But, going back to Del Toro, yeah, he also did that Hellboy remake that nobody asked for.
Oh, boy.
And really, the person I really feel sorry for with that remake, boy, is David Harbour, man. Like, David, like a fucks with you with Stranger Things, man. But nah, you didn't need to be in that movie, boy. Nah, but thankfully, Stranger Things saved his career, right? It didn't end, right? Thankfully, but dude did not need to be in that movie, especially playing Hellboy. Nah, man, nah. And an R-rated version of it, no. So L aside, though, Neil for me will always be I will always remember Neil for these two films, right? And especially with this one that we're going to talk about here, The Descent, right? But yeah, Ricardo, take it away, your introduction to The Descent, how you feel about it then and now, because I know you had it as an honorable mention as well. And just kind of looking back at what it meant to Neil's filmography. So yeah, take it away.
Yeah. This one is a classic for a good reason. I did not see this in theaters. Right, I didn't even know it wasn't in theaters. Finding this out from you. I catch it on cable. I remember watching it on, I forget, it's Cinemax or Stars or one of them at the time, and just seeing it was like surprisingly engrossing and engaging. And yeah, then the ending hit you, that fake out. I was like, oh, would they cooked it. This was excellent. Really like this movie, mostly because again, claustrophobia, atmosphere, and it's one of those characters kind of make a lot of smart calls and things do work out still. That's what I like about it. It have a couple of dumb character moments, but nothing like too egregious or like that. It's understandable dumb character moment, and yeah, so
Yes.
it worked. Like that's why it worked in its own conceit, and yeah, just really smart filmmaking builds it up and then hit you with that dread ending. And like, oh yeah, this is excellent. It's a great horror movie. It's a classic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, any quick thoughts on Dog Soldiers, and especially with that being
I never saw it.
Oh, you never saw
I never
it?
saw his movie. I watched it. No.
Okay, well,
Oh,
I would
worth it.
strongly recommend it to check it out, right? But again, think
Right.
about Sam Raimi Evil Dead. Think about that debut horror film feature, and you will understand, when you was coming from with that, right? But again, it's just, well, I know you didn't see it, Ricardo, right? But it's just how he was able to grow from that, right, and show that growth with the Descent. Though, to me, is really amazing, right? So yeah, lastly, CC, seeing that you picked this as your number one, and of course, throughout this review, you will expound on why you rank this as the best horror film that you've seen over the past 25 years. But yeah,
Mhm.
your introduction to this film, and to extent Dog Soldiers.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and Neil Marshall is such a difficult filmmaker for me because there was a time where if you had asked me to name my favorite like modern filmmakers, I would have listed Neil Marshall, one of them. Like I came across him when I was I want to say 18, 19 thereabouts, just getting into R-rated movies for the first time and really getting into horror and watching a lot of werewolf movies at the time. And so I watched Dog Soldiers and I loved Dogs. I love and loved Dog Soldiers. Dog Soldiers it's like we were saying earlier, it's a movie that's about it's very inspiring as a debut film because it's very clever about being able to do a lot with not very much. And again, yeah, the Evil Dead comparison is completely correct. It's a movie where he's got a pretty zany premise, but the film is about taking that concept and like being able to execute it in a very smart way without you, the viewer, really seeing the strings. But then, after coming out with Dog Soldiers and that film being as good as it is, he then follows it up with The Descent. And I have a soft spot for sophomore films, I think, because like it's one thing to make a strong debut. Making a debut feature as a director in particular is difficult. But the question we all have is, okay, you made your debut, you've shown the world that you were out there. What are you going to do now? And I think that sophomore films, are often very interesting because what happens is you have someone who came out with a debut. Now the world is paying attention, but now they're going to get a little more money. So now the question is, what are they going to do now? This is how you get Us, for example, Jordan Peele's Us as a sophomore film, which I think is just a little stronger than Get Out. I mentioned it in my, top films of the last 25 years, as horror films of the last 25 years as well. I think, oh goodness, The Lighthouse as Robert Eggers' sophomore film, again, even stronger than The Witch, in my opinion. I think sophomore films in general can, and even the ones that aren't good, can often be very interesting because, again, you're taking this young, scrappy filmmaker and you're giving them the opportunity to work with a slightly bigger budget. So then I get all that being said, The Descent is probably one of the best sophomore films because even though Neil Marshall now has a studio budget to work with, not Hollywood, but still a studio budget, he doesn't forget his roots as scrappy horror. And if anything, he just uses that money incredibly intelligently to create a film that is a little more ambitious and a film that is a little more polished, but never quite forgetting that scrappy, raw sensibility of Dog Soldiers. I think for me, sadly, that's kind of where Neil Marshall's winning streak for most people ends. I am in the minority where I quite like Doomsday, although I will admit that Doomsday is not the greatest film, as like this weird love letter to Escape from New York and Mad Max. It's kind of mess is the best way I could put it. It's kind of a mess.
I think I was planning to see that at a point in time, but I heard iffy things about it. I was like, but I kind of like post-apocalyptic films like that, though.
Yeah, no, I recommend it. It's worth at least one watch. I have a copy as well. Like I think there was a lot of hate, and to be fair, when the first two films you've come out with are Dog Soldiers and The Descent, the expectations for your next film are quite high. But then Doomsday is a bit of a letdown, even though, again, I still think it's pretty good. It's also got an especially demented needle drop by the Fine Young Cannibals, which in context is hilarious in the most morbidly humorous way possible.
Oh, I see what you mean. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal. And then he followed that up with Centurion, which is another film that people, I like it. It's not as good as his first two, but I think by that point, the momentum for his career had definitely run out and he retreated to television. But then he has a bit of a comeback because he gets to direct a couple episodes of Game of Thrones, including, I think he directed the Battle of Blackwater Bay, which I've not seen Game of Thrones,
Oh,
but I have heard that is one of the best episodes.
it is. It is.
Like, I have heard that episode is phenomenal. And so that got attention back to him again. And then he blew it with the Hellboy reboot. And listen, the Hellboy reboot is a movie that I saw in theaters, and I am so sad that I saw it in theaters.
Wait,
wasted
Ricardo, didn't you see that in theaters too?
I did.
All right. I feel sorry for y'all because I watched it at home. I was going to watch it in theaters, but I heard I heard about how bad it was. Then I watched it at home. It's like, yep, Ricardo was right. It was bad. It was terrible.
Up there with Cats and Guy Ritchie's King Arthur movie as one of the worst films I have seen in theaters in a
the Guy Ritchie, the King Arthur was a mess.
I saw the King Arthur. I saw the King Arthur in theaters. All I want to say is that the third act is great. It's just everything else leading up to it is bad. It's just a weird, entertaining level of bad.
I will always be mad at the Guy Ritchie King Arthur because I turned down the opportunity to see Guardians Volume 2 in theaters for a second time so that I could go watch Guy Ritchie's King Arthur instead. And I am so mad to this day. It's almost been 10 years, and I'm still mad that I made that because that was the bad decision. That was a bad decision. But yeah, no, his Hellboy, Neil Marshall's Hellboy is so disappointing. Like, none of the grit and the excitement and none of the intelligence of his first two movies is in his Hellboy, and certainly none of the idea that he learned anything from his time making studio films or even making Game of Thrones. I mean, and I originally had been a little more forgiving to the man because I had heard that the big problem with that movie was that Neil Marshall, Mike Mignola, and David Harbour were all running around with their own very different ideas of what this movie should be. And Lionsgate is trying to push this idea as a franchise, and then the whole thing just doesn't come together into a coherent project at all. And since then, Neil Marshall just seems to have made just kind of direct-to-video or made-for-streaming action movies, and they don't seem to have like that early period of excitement it's very much, I think for me it's very personal because it's very much watching a filmmaker that I was at one point very excited about kind of slowly deteriorate and then have a comeback and then deteriorate again. And so but anytime I do feel sad about that, I do go back to The Descent because The Descent is still, even all these years later, and the fact that Neil Marshall has never been able to make a film as good as The Descent still holds up as genuinely, I think, the best horror film to come out over the last 25 years, and genuinely one of the gnarliest survival horror films that has ever been made, in my opinion. But also a film that's a very intelligent use of like escalation. And I'll get into this more when we talk about the film. But I think the smartest thing about the film, and again, I think that what made Neil Marshall stand out wasn't just being a horror director and gore and his ability to use low budgets. He was an incredibly intelligent filmmaker. He was a very smart filmmaker when it came to writing and situations and scenarios and kind of when to make plots escalate at what time, if that makes sense. And I think that that's kind of the missing ingredient from some of his later films. But yes, the thing that I come back to about this film, especially as a writer and as someone who specialized in narrative structure in grad school, I should say, the thing that I come back to about The Descent is how well and how intelligently it is structured. But we'll get into that in a moment.
Yes, we shall. So, I didn't write out any notes really, compared to Battle Royale, which you spoke about earlier. So I'm just gonna go off just from what I remember, right? No, I'm not gonna spend too long, right? But anyway, But it's really amazing that it was really fortunate to say that I was able to rewatch Dog Soldiers in preparation for this review here, right? Because one thing that I really love about those two films here, like I said, they should be viewed as a double feature, is how they feel like mirror images of themselves, right? So you have, a group of characters who are in the woods. Well, in Dog Soldiers, they start off in the woods and then they end up in this, big cottage, and, they are being attacked by werewolves. In The Descent, it's the 6 women who are in the woods and they go spelunking and they are being attacked by these creatures, right? Called the crawlers, right? That's what they're called, right? And
this movie in retrospect, kind of funny because of all the memes about people going in caves and dying.
I think I remember you mentioned that before. Yeah.
Yeah. This kind of cracked me up in retrospect because the memes about a guy that's sticking his face or leaving his family to go explore a cave. It's like, oh, you're right. Spelunking is a kind of weird nonsense thing. As
It
say,
really is.
Yeah, what weird white people nonsense is this, right? It's one of those.
Yeah, and it's the whole idea, that to talk shit about Spelunky, right? But that's the idea that you are going into this deep, dark, dangerous cavern, right? With your fingers crossed that you're gonna find your way back out, right? Just to come out and say, hey, I went into that deep, dark cavern and came out alive. Yay. Okay. What if you don't come out alive? Then what? What's the point? I don't get it.
It only memes of them sticking their head in this tiny, tiny space, and then they hear a story, and you get the Netflix documentary about how they did, and how they have to spend the last 14 hours of their life. Last 14 hours of their life sticking this tight space. I'm like, all right, enough. Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that what the film really gets into is that one of the appeals of splunking is how dangerous it is. Like,
right.
I think, like, because if we're talking about the film's 2 leads, there's oh goodness, what is her name again? I've got my notes here.
Oh, it's Sarah and Cora. No, not
Juno.
No, Juno. I keep thinking Cora for some reason.
So Sarah, as far as our 2 leads go, Sarah's the one that we are rooting for.
Yes.
Juno is kind of the character that by the end of the movie you despise, because Juno, I think Ricardo was talking about how most of the characters in this movie are very smart. The character who is the least intelligent is Juno. Juno is the one. Well, Juno's got the most white people nonsense, but also definitely an adrenaline junkie.
Right.
Like, Juno is not a smart woman, and
they get into that. Like, it's very tricky to write. Oh, I don't want to say stupidity, but like, okay, a character flaw. It's very difficult to write that. That's very difficult to write because it's one thing to say, okay, this person's an idiot, but then you have to reflect what a real world idiot would do, maybe. But then you have to ask yourself, well, why would they be in this dangerous situation in the first place? And so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to write characters making mistakes and understandable mistakes, but for character reasons, not they had a missing piece of information or something like that. That's very difficult to write. And this movie like kind of nails it. It's like, oh no, this makes mostly makes sense about why she fuck up in this way. It's like, oh, okay, I like that.
Yes. Well, and I think that's what I mean about the film structure. So like, Juno, as you said, Juno makes complete sense because, and you're completely correct. She's easily the character that's the least intelligent, but it never comes across like she's doing it because the writers need it to be convenient. If that makes sense, like it's
right.
She's not dumb. She's not dumb to get she's not dumb to get the writers out of a narrative cul-de-sac that they can't get out of. No, especially with the opening where they establish and especially the like the drama that kind of comes out between Sarah and Juno as the film goes on.
Yes,
where it's revealed that because the whole crux of the film is that Sarah loses her husband and daughter, and this is an incredibly traumatic loss for her. And then Juno has this idea that she's going to help make it up to her by taking her on a splunking trip with all their friends, and that'll somehow, first of all, like that will somehow make it better. Like, oh, I'm sorry, your husband and child are dead.
Yeah, but even before that, even before that, it's established that Juno didn't quote unquote stick around. She left. She went to the States.
Right.
And when Sarah and her friends come to this. Well, Sarah and Beth, that's the other friend who was there at that time. Come to the States as well to meet Juno. Juno apologized like, "Oh, I'm sorry I couldn't stick around, but hey, I'm glad you're here." It's like, ooh, red flag right there.
Which is why when it is revealed that Juno and Sarah's late husband were having an affair, it hits like a truck.
And it's how they find this out, but I'll get to that later, right? But yeah, that is an amazing moment though. But that's quick point in terms of just comparing Dog Soldiers to The Descent, right? What I love with Dog Soldiers is that it's just pure male testosterone stuff, right? So that's why the easiest film to to reference with Dog Soldiers is Predator, right? It's the same thing, right? It's just these badass these badass soldiers in the woods or forest, wherever it is, and they're being attacked by these creatures, right? That's what it is, right? So yes, in that film,
Predator is really interesting because Predator is a slasher movie, but instead of the people being slashed being teenagers, they're these big badass soldiers who we spend the first act establishing are these big tough guys, and then we spend the rest of the film watching something even bigger and scarier than them kill them off.
Yeah, you know so interesting about Predator, just to talk quickly, right? That point that you just made there is something that just came to my mind over time. It's not like I stumbled onto a think piece or a video that told me this, but just over time when I watched and understood Predator, the original film, I was like, yeah, this is like a slasher film though, but you just swap the teens and the serial killer with badass soldiers and alien trophy hunter who just kills them for sport. Like it just dawned on me just like that now, but that's so interesting though. Yeah.
It is. Well, and I think what Neil Marshall learned from Predator is that one of the most effective things you can do in a horror movie is take a cast of characters, establish how competent they are, and then put them in a situation where their competence is tested, because then the audience is immediately... You don't have to spend too much time explaining to the audience how dangerous the situation is. You can just establish how good these characters are at what they do, and then put them in a situation that they clearly are struggling with without you having to spend much time explaining or immediately go, this is a little beyond them. Because again, with Predator, we have that whole opening sequence where they attack the one village and they actually have a pretty pitched gun battle. And we spend so much time with these soldiers. So when something in the woods is stalking them and killing them, we're immediately that much more intimidated because we're like, these guys are not...
they're the creme de la creme. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, they are top of their craft. And I think that with The Descent, because this is one of the other things about The Descent as far as structure goes, before the creepers show up, it is still a good horror movie. And I think that's actually one of the key things about The Descent. Before the crawlers or whatever they're called, before they show up, it is still a good horror movie because, we meet these women, we hang out with them for a bit, we kind of get a sense of their interpersonal dynamics in their lives and everything. We see them go on this splunking expedition, and we see how good they are. Like, they know what they're doing. They know their way around caves. They know all the safety. They know all the stuff. They're very good at what they do. But as we kind of slowly but surely take some of the, we kind of take away some of their security and some of their stability, we kind of start to get a sense that this situation is dangerous. And then the some of the other stuff happens. And it already is a very gnarly survival movie where it's these people are in a cave and that gets to another reveal that I will let you talk about, Matthew. But once that first reveal is made about the kind of cave they are in, it's a very gripping survival movie in that respect, because now it's these characters that know what they're doing, but they're in a situation that they don't necessarily have the means to deal with. And so it becomes thrilling in that direction because you still want to see them get out of the situation. And then Marshall very intelligently kind of brings in the crawlers at that point. But yes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So for me, that's just lastly with the Dog Soldiers comparison, right? So while Dog Soldiers was just all about, soldiers who, I'll put it like this, right? I really enjoy the film, right? Like it works as, just as a solid, enjoyable, action-filled creature feature, right? But it's to the point where, but there's also bits of humor that I forgot was in the film, right? Intentional and slightly unintentional, right? But this is the type of show, Ricardo, where even when a werewolf is about to attack a character, the character has a gun, and it's just a matter of them just pulling the trigger. They have to say a catchphrase. They have to say a one-liner before they fire a shot. It's that type of show. I like that kind of energy that's brought to the table.
It's a bit of a sausage fest. If we're being honest,
exactly.
Like Dog Soldiers is a little bit.
It is. But when it comes to the scent, however, right? I love that it is very feminine. The way how the characters talk, especially in that like when they're in North Carolina and they actually meet up in that cottage, and they spend the night there just talking and hanging out and whatnot. Just how natural they talk to each other. I love that, right? And it's also written by Neil, right? He didn't have no co-writers involved. He wrote that, right? But it just feels very different. Well, obviously, right? Genders, right? But yeah, it just feels different from what we saw in Dog Soldiers, where it's just about, we need to get to the site, and, we need to go to this point here, there, right? There's this sort of tactile vibe to how they talk, right? Here, it feels natural, right? But I'm also seeing this too in terms of how they respond to the situation as well, right? From the moment they get into that cave, and in particular that there's one scene in particular involving Sarah being stuck, and she's trying to get out, and one of her friends like, listen, I love this line where she says, you've already been through the worst already, right? So what's the worst that could happen, right? And this is where basically she's stuck, and she just kind of has to get her way out. She has to kind of wiggle her way out of this tight spot. And yet, Neil just decides and says, here's what, I'm just going to have a little earthquake take place, just a little earthquake, and now she's stuck. What she say, if she stays here longer, she could get stuck even more, right? So it's like, okay, I'm gonna pull you out right now, and that leads to what happens, right? So I just love those little moments, right? But the point I get at is that these are not badass, soldiers or whatnot, right? They are just average women who, for some reason, just love spelunking, right? So yes, the experience in this field, they know how to move, but they feel fear, right? And they respond to it, right? Especially with Sarah and that very grisly death, which I thought you guys were going to mention earlier. And yeah, in recapping this film, I was reminded of how Final Destination 2 inspired it is, especially with those runs coming out of that truck, and boy, bad points for where the camera is positioned when you see Jessica as in Sarah's daughter when she gets killed. Yeah, boy. Ooh, boy. But talk about a way to open your film. Eh? Wow, right? But yeah. It's just these characters who they are very resourceful. They take on their feet and whatnot. They experience what it is they do, right? But I'm saying all this too, right? Because when it comes to the crawlers now, they have to deal with this thing, right? And you really see it more with Sarah and Judah, right? And one thing that I was reminded with the show here, right? Just the use of the pickaxe in that film, especially when Judo is fighting off the characters, right? I always tell myself, and I found this out through Wikipedia too. Well, I should say Wikipedia confirmed this. That is what inspired the Tomb Raider reboot.
Okay.
I was like, really? Yeah, because if you look at Lara in that version, she is very lean. She's very tough. I would say she looks very much like body type like Judo does. And she has that pickaxe as well. Or, wait, I think it's called a pickaxe. I think that's what you call it, right? But yeah, just that moment with, especially is the moment with Judo fighting the morpher. When I saw that, I was like, Tomb Raider. That's where they get the idea from. That's where they get the idea from. That one scene with Judo fighting off the two of them, right? And yeah, the fight scenes though are very, very visceral though. And one thing that I love about the show too is use of lighting, right? That one scene with the area of the section of the cave that's lit in red. And I love that it's both a representation of the flare, but also the mineral, like the rock itself that's around there, right? So it's just lit purposefully red on purpose, right? I love that, right? So yeah, there's a moment where Sarah falls into this pit, right? Like falls into this pool, and so you can interpret it as either blood or water, right? It's clearly blood, right? But the way how it's lit, you can interpret it however you want to, right? But it's her in that pit, she comes out, and it's how it's set up to her, because prior to that, no, she sees her friend dies, right? Dying, and she is forced to take, a big rock now and slam it on her head, basically, right, to kill her, right? Immediately after that, a crawler baby or crawler child jumps on this woman's head on a back, sorry. She flips it over and she stomps it, right? Like crushes its head, right? And when she falls into that pit, right? Into that pool, sorry. You will believe the child's friggin' mother goes after it, right? And that's just Neil just really showing off just how creative he is, right? Because, there is this feminist angle that is rightfully deserved, right? People kind of look at it as a feminist piece, like, oh, the crawlers are men, and, we have these women who have to fight back, right? So it's easy to look at it from that angle, right? It makes sense, right? There's a moment that kind of slips by people's radars, but yeah, that one attack that takes place is the mother of that same child that Sarah stomped on, right?
Right.
And it works too. And yeah, she just grabs that bone and just bashes that crawler to death, right? And it's just that primal nature, right? This going back to great writing. It's not badass soldiers, but it's mothers who, you should say women or females, right, who have to defend themselves. It's that maternal instinct that comes out in such that raw detail, right? That is great writing, dude. That is stellar writing, in my opinion. I love that.
Well, and one of the things I love about The Descent, and one of the reasons that I highlight this as my favorite horror movie of the last 25 years, is that this is also a film that seems deceptively simple, but there's actually a lot going on under the hood. You mentioned lighting earlier. Like, the whole movie is, for a movie that is as unassuming as The Descent is, the lighting in general is really strong. So, like, I was thinking about the hospital sequence when, like, she wakes up and discovers that her wife that her husband and his daughter
is that green
dead.
Yes.
Yes,
that green light. Yeah.
Oh, that lighting. Yes. No, that lighting is, like, even that one sequence, the lighting is so creative and it's so expressive, and throughout the film lighting is used to communicate mood and tone. But at the same time, Marshall is very particular and clever about where the light is coming from, if that makes sense. Like, he's paying attention to sources of light, and, like, but also how to effectively capture certain scenes and images. Like the scene when the first crawler shows up, which we find out because the one character has their camera and has it on infrared and is, moving around and stops at the one person who's got the crawler just standing right behind her. And it's like, God, it's just like, I see this movie on a pretty regular basis, and that sequence always makes me jump a little bit. Like, whenever, like, the reveal of the first crawler that's standing behind her that she can't see because of the infrared, I'm always like, there he is.
Yeah.
And this goes back to that whole sequence with the red, with the pool. There's also a very valid interpretation of this film that we are watching, and this is not any kind of boring, like, oh, the crawlers aren't real. No. More than that. This movie is also kind of Sarah's descent into madness, if I'm being quite blunt, because this is a woman who starts the film with an incredibly destructive trauma. She's recovering, but then she's thrust into another traumatic experience, and she kind of snaps. There is an excellent sequence where she's in the pool and she kind of slowly rises out of it. That reminds me of Apocalypse Now, for example. And then, like, by the end of when you think of who Sarah is by the end of the film and the kind of stuff she does, and then how the movie ends, like, this is a movie about a character kind of having a trauma, and instead of healing from it, the trauma just kind of unravels her mind. And it's one of the things about the film that is truly disturbing to watch, because, if you're a certain character, by the end of the movie, you may need to be more afraid of Sarah than of the crawlers.
Yeah, agreed. So just a couple things before we wrap things up, right? So one thing I love about the film, really, its strength isn't just with the visceral nature of the crawlers or whatnot, which, by the way, remain some of the most, like, some of the creepiest creatures I've ever seen on screen, though. Like, I would say they rival, believe it or not, oh gosh, I've got the names of the vampires, that what they're called in Blade 2. I forget what you call them.
Oh goodness, are they the creepers or something?
No, but the name escapes me right now. But they really remind me of those vampires in Blade 2. Reavers, yes.
Ricardo. Yes, Reavers, yes.
Yeah, the way how they move, I was reminded that these motherfuckers actually like could climb on cave walls, and you see them on the roofs
Yeah.
or what. I was like, God damn, like what? This is where we going? Okay, right? But yeah, apart from all that, what makes the show really shine? Just the character development here, right? It's just these simple little moments that you're just sort of watching casually as the show goes by, right? So, like, for example, at the very beginning, after that whole white rafting, trip, right? As they come out, right? There's a moment where Sarah's husband helps Juno up, right? And the moment that she takes off her helmet and you see her hair, whatnot, you see Beth, who is just a distance away looking at her, right? But Sarah, however, is distracted with her daughter Jessica, as all those things are. So it's like Beth sort of figures out what's going on beforehand, right? And that leads to the shocking reveal later on now, where after Juno is like wildly trying to kill, the first crawler that she runs into, yeah, she ends up killing Beth by accident. Like she swings this this bone, this
Yeah.
this sharp tip bone, sorry, and yeah, it sticks Beth through the throat, right? And yeah, Beth pulls this necklace, and you're not really thinking about it too, huh? It's when Sarah comes and see Beth and she's still like, trying to talk, but blood's coming out of her neck. Yeah, that's when she shows her the necklace and you see it's this a similar one to what her husband gave her. It's like, oh shit, that's where it is, right? So and I mean I could go on with the character bits, right? But there's a few what I mentioned too, right? So earlier on, right, before Sarah even runs into Beth, right, when she's dying, Juno confronts Sarah and basically tells her that Holly, right, who is one of the characters that they meet that Sarah meets in the cabin, yeah, she's dead too, right? But then she says Beth didn't make it, right? And they sort of leave it at that near the end of the film, right? After they have before Sarah and Juno have the little vicious fight. Well, I should say they have the little fight against the creepers, the crawlers, sorry, and it's badass. There's even a moment where Juno actually gouges the eyes out of one of them. That was very, very nasty, but I love that, right? Prior to all that, no. Sarah asks Juno again, what happened to Beth? And she says she didn't make it. Or something along that line, right? And then there's like this brief pause for like about a few seconds, right? And I'd notice it. So it's like Sarah asks her the same question again. Well, sorry, asks her about Beth again. Because previously, Juno mentioned Beth, right? But now Sarah asks the question. So it's like, oh, we're bringing up Beth again. And it's that look, like Sarah kind of watches her a little bit like, oh, okay, I get it now. All right. And then they just move on, and that's when the fight, with the crawlers take place. And then after that, it just sort of ends with Sarah just, hitting Juno in the leg and leaving her to die, right? It's those little bits of character moments that I love, though, where, yeah, that tension was built up, right? But it's just something that just was left unsaid, or just her repeating a question like, okay, I catch you now, I get where you're coming from, right? I'll show one more example, right? There's a moment that is very understated, right? But it absolutely works, right? Where our characters are now going up the river, up the mountain to the entrance to the cave, right? And there's this river that's coming down, right? That's the same hole, the same entrance where Sarah quote unquote escapes, right? We'll get to that moment in the end, right?
Right.
Oh yeah.
So when the camera is like following them, right? There's a moment where one of the characters, I forget what's her name, but she's the one who has the camera with her, right? She's talking about, what are the side effects of being in a cave for too long? You could get into hallucinations, you could get into this, dehydration, blah, 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 right? But if you notice, the music swells and it drowns out what she's saying, right? But prior to that, one of the characters, I think it's Holly, just say blah, 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 right? So it's like, oh, Neil is kind of letting the audience know, oh, you see that little piece of info that you thought was unnecessary to the plot? It actually kind of is. Because later on, when Sarah now discovers the crawlers for herself, she hears her daughter's laugh and she runs towards it. And then, I won't lie, then the first time I heard it, I was like, wait, you actually bought into that? Like, you actually thought that would be your daughter, so why would you rush towards that, right? But then You realize, oh, it's all in her head because she's so swept up in her
Yes.
own grief, right? But as I said, CC, because she is descending into madness, it's like, yeah, she is hearing things now because one of the characters already mentioned hallucination, so it's like that, right? And that will lead to the finale here, right? So I love that. But before we get to the finale, right, I should also mention too, another big red flag is when they realize, oh, they actually not in the exact mountain or cave that they were supposed to be in, right? Because Juno being Juno just threw the guide, sorry, the map or the guidebook, if you will, in the car, or in one of the cars, sorry. It's like, yeah, we don't need that, we're gonna go there. And she tells them after the fact, yeah, we're just gonna be the first ones to explore this place. It's like, you bitch, you know what I mean? But I just love how it's all kind of set up there, but it's like, wow, Juno? Really, Juno?
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's one of the moments in the movie that I talk about because I mentioned earlier this is a film about escalation, right? Okay, so they go and explore this cave. Okay, this is already a dangerous situation. While they're exploring the cave, and we already do a good job of setting up this kind of some tension between them, and some of that comes out while they're exploring. But they're still having a good time. Then there's the cave-in. Okay, well, their situation has got a little more desperate. Because now we're in a cave where the way out has been blocked, so we need to figure out another way out. But, well, someone will find us, right? And then we get the information from Juno that this is not a well-traveled cave that they will be super familiar with. This is a new cave that she just found out in the middle of nowhere, and they don't even know if anyone... And at first there's this little bit of ambiguity of well, maybe some people know about this cave, but then later they find some old ass mining equipment, and they're like, oh, no one has been here for years. No one knows about this cave. This and like that. And every time we get new information like that, the risk and the danger of the situation escalates, and then the crawlers show up, where now we discover that they're not alone down here. And again, in one of the movie's other brilliant moments, we never find out about the crawlers. We know that they are there, that they exist, but we don't.
I forget where they're supposed to be because is it
Exactly.
the Appalachians?
Yeah, it's in those mountains.
Yeah, they're supposed to be in the Appalachian. They're kind of in the Appalachian Mountains. Yeah.
Right, so you're supposed to play with that whole if you hear voices in the Appalachians, so go there and talk a lot of conspiracy theories at borderline myth making and urban legends around the Appalachians. It's getting to all kind of the Appalachians actually is one of the oldest mountains, and geologically that's correct. That's actually true. But it plays with that concept.
Yep. Well, and also
what's really there? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know this because my wife actually has connections to Appalachian culture. There is a lot of mythology and folklore around the Appalachian Mountains. There's a lot. There's very much a very rich understanding of, they are ominous in a lot of ways, and there's just a lot of culture very much being you don't wander off in the woods at night, you don't follow suspicious noises, you don't go around, you certainly don't go exploring caves no one has ever been in, very much this is a very, and what I love about that is Neil Marshall just kind of lets that be there, right? He doesn't comparing it to a bad movie that came out a couple of years ago. Ishi Shyamalan's directorial debut,
right.
Oh, good. Where where it turns out that the bad guy, the evil creatures in a movie that is a showcase of explaining too much, because again the premise is simple. A group of people are trapped in a weird house in the middle of a forest they can't get out of. One wall of the house is transparent, and every night creatures they can't see come and watch them in the house. Unfortunately, Ishi Shyamalan explains in great detail what the creatures are, what the house is, why they're there, and it's one of those things where it deflates the tension of the movie so thoroughly because there's not a single question we have that she does not step in and go, well, here's the answer to that. Something like The Descent, on the other hand, we have a lot of questions, and the movie actually does a really good job of making sure that the audience and the characters are both in the dark. There's not a character who knows more than we do, and we have just I don't know how to explain this, but the events of the movie are happening to the characters and us at almost around the same time. There's not a point of view character who knows less than the others, but there's not also one person who knows more than anyone else. We are experiencing the events as they're happening, and we have the same limited perspective of the characters. I feel like this is why it's the kind of movie where, as you're watching it, you kind of find yourself wondering, like, what would I do in this situation, if that makes sense? Because the characters don't know more about what's going on than you do, and there's not really an explanation. So, like, we don't find out what the hell the crawlers are. We don't know whether they're like an ancient species or they're like mutated
Yeah,
humans
that's
or whatever.
right. Or that's
Because
feral people.
like
Or that's feral people. Or
right,
it's very.
they,
There's a kind of very similar parallel to Bone Tomahawk kind of scenario. Now. It's
yes,
like, oh,
yes.
what are these things here? Yeah,
I thought about that a lot while watching Bone Tomahawk. Where I was like, it's very similar to The Descent, because we don't really get a great explanation for what these things are. We just get enough of an explanation to they're not in Native Americans, which I appreciate,
right.
but we don't really get a thorough explanation of what the hell they are, why their culture is the way it is, and that kind of thing. With The Descent, we don't find out what these things are because the characters never find out what these things are. The characters never find out why there are these creatures that live deep underground. They could be the Falmer from Skyrim for all we know, but
Right.
like you know what I mean? Like, we never get the explanation because Neil Marshall's doing a very good job of limiting the information we have access to the information that the characters themselves have, which seems like a no-brainer. That seems like an obvious way to write a horror movie, but I'm always amazed how many writers screw this up.
Yeah, people like to over-explain. I don't know. It's my generation. I think I blame for that. We want all the answers.
No, I think it's
I
more
don't.
of a
I don't know.
I think it's more of a logic thing that you just worry that people won't buy into what it is you're
Right.
telling them. So you have to explain it. So you're like, oh, I get it. So that
Yeah.
means I love it now because it's
Well, and I
explained
think
to me.
that's
Right.
like, well, and let's be honest, though, there are people who don't like The Descent because they don't know where the crawlers come from, but those people are boring. And I think that Neil Marshall does a very good job of being like, hey, if you're the kind of person who was vibing with this movie up until the supernatural element, well, this movie isn't for you. I think it's one of the other things I like about this movie. Like, this is not a movie that apologizes for what it is at all. Like, even Dog Soldiers does a little more to try and explain things than The Descent does. But The Descent is a very confident movie. The Descent is very much like, this is what I am. I'm not going to appeal to everyone, but I am going to be the best version of myself as a film that I possibly can be. And I deeply appreciate that. I think some of my least favorite movies are movies that try too hard to appeal to everyone and try to like, I think we talked about this a little bit with James Gunn's Superman. How there's elements of the film that like Gunn doesn't really go out of his way to explain. There's characters in the film that kind of are like some of the extended DC characters that he's not really. He's seemingly unconcerned if people think that they're a little weird or a little strange or they've never heard of them. And I increasingly find myself drawn to that type of filmmaking. I like it when filmmakers don't hold me by the hand. They don't explain everything to me. And they're like, look, if you enjoy what I'm doing, that's great. If you don't, there are other movies out there. Because at the end of the day, that's completely true, right? Like, if you don't, like, if you're were the kind of person vibing with The Descent until the supernatural stuff happened, there's other movies you will probably enjoy more. Like, hell, Deliverance, a film that has a lot of DNA with The Descent, is probably a film you would like more than The Descent, I think, at that point.
Right.
Yeah. Come to think of it, I haven't seen Deliverance in a long while though. So thanks for adding that to my to rewatch list, right? But yeah, I mean, I can't close this review off without talking about the finale itself, right? And yeah, I was reminded of how spew-inducing of a gut punch this thing is, boy, because and it's just how expertly crafted it is, right? Because this comes right after Sarah leaves Juno for dead, right? Leaves her for dead, sorry. And I don't know, for some reason when I see this moment play out, right? I forgot the name of the code itself, right? This was like a part of like early Hollywood where if a character does something wrong, they must be punished in the end. The bad guy can't leave.
The Hays Code.
The Hays Code, that's what it is. I don't know if this moment was meant to be sort of like a update of the Hays Code, but that's that idea of listen, Sarah did what she did. and she's not gonna get away with it, right? So I love how early on, you're thinking, oh, she's gonna be free. And I love that wide shot of the light coming from that entrance, and it shines down on this like mountain of bones, or at least that's how it looks like, and you just see Sarah crawling up. I love that, right? And I will not lie, the previous recap that I gave this film, I bought into it, I was telling myself, okay, something's gonna happen to her outside of that cave, but I was just watching the film play on as it is, right? She jumps in the car, she drives off, and then there's that moment where that truck with the logs show up again. A truck with logs passes by. She she opens up the window, she puts down the window, pukes, and then just telling herself, okay, something's wrong here, right? And then she just sort of wakes back up, and is that shot where, and they alluded throughout the film, right? This idea of seeing Jessica with this birthday cake, this birthday cake, right? And it's that moment where you see the mom, where you see Sarah, you see the image of her daughter, and it's just lit by this it's just basically lit by this light, campfire basically, right? And the music and how it swells and whatnot. And you just get that final shot where it's realized that she is gonna be, that's what's stuck in this cave, but she's gonna die there. And pretty much everybody, all 6 characters have died in this cave here, boy. It is such a bleak way to end this film, and to me it's the perfect way to end it up.
Yeah, and then they cut the black, and then they go to the photo in the end.
Yeah, the photo, but I was like, wow, boy,
oh man,
is it that the film wants you to walk away with tears in their eyes, boy? I don't know, I mean, if you feel sad to the point of crying at the end of the film, okay, but to me, it's just like, listen, at the end of the day, you're supposed to feel unsettled. Is the idea that these characters literally have spelunked their way into hell, and there was no way out of that. And that's how you're supposed to feel. That's a good way of
putting it.
That's what it is. That's what it is. Yeah, that's what it is, right? So I mean, what more? Sorry,
what was I thinking? Well, I was thinking about how. Well, I was talking about how. Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how this film is Sarah's descent into madness, because, after watching her struggle with, her trauma and the things she's been going through the whole movie, and watching her kind of going a little more animalistic as she's down here and as she's kind of surrendering to survival. And there's that motif of the birthday of her daughter in the darkness with the birthday cake over and over and over again. And then the fake out where she hallucinates an escape and then wakes back up in the cave. And then what happens? She looks up out into the darkness, sees her imaginary daughter sitting there with the birthday cake. She smiles and reaches out for it. And that, for me, was that is, to me, such a disturbing ending, because it's very much like, there's so many ways to read it, very much like, but in so many ways, Sarah is accepting her fate. She is accepting that she's not getting out of the situation, that this is not a situation she can get out of, but at least in her fantasies and her hallucinations, she has her daughter back. And that hits like a truck every time I watch this movie. Like, every single time. It's like...
No, it does.
At the end, it's every time... it hits like a truck.
Yeah.
I didn't do that. But yeah. No, yeah.
Yeah, well, just to get to rating, right? Or just say final thoughts of rating. Yeah, this is one of the best horror films of the 2000s and of the past 25 years. It's just that raw, visceral nature about it, just unapologetically say, we're not gonna stop to explain to you what these crawlers are. It's just these characters who just were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We're just gonna see how they respond to that, right? And yeah, nobody makes it, but hey, it's a descent after all. So hey, at least I told you in the title what to expect, right? So there you go. But that aside, though, yeah, this is a fantastic sophomore film, from Neil Marshall. It's a shame that, his filmography didn't match what he did with that film and Dog Soldiers, right? And for me, I could see myself owning both films on Blu-ray and see that, Dog Soldiers already came out on 4K, UHD already, right? But yeah, seeing that The Descent is getting this 4K re-release, though, I would love if it would just out. I don't know. It's just some local cinema that decides to just put this out there just for no reason, but just to say that it's celebrated its anniversary. I mean, for God's sake, time of us recording this, we're getting Back to the Future, right? Which is one of the most Americana films ever made, and yet it's coming out here in Trinidad to celebrate its 40th anniversary. Its 40th anniversary. So okay, well, thank you, I guess. I'm not gonna see it. I'll probably buy it on Blu-ray one day, the trilogy, but not right now though. But yeah, for me, I really do want to own both Dog Soldiers and The Descent though, because I mean these are two great horror films in my opinion, right? But to me, The Descent stands tall as just Neil Marshall's crowning achievement in my opinion, and one that I imagine a lot more filmmakers will be inspired by for years to come, right? Not just filmmakers but film fans as well, right? But yeah, for me, I'm gonna give this a light to decent 4.5 out of 5. Definitely see this film. If you haven't, please do. If you haven't seen this film in a long while, please do. It still holds up, and I can't wait to see how it holds up 25 years from now, man. Absolutely love this film. So yeah, Ricardo, final thoughts to rate it.
This one is it really works. Great, as I said in my list. Great atmosphere. It builds great tension. Decent and pretty good, smart character writing. Because like I said, it takes genius to write stupidity, right? Well,
Yes.
and it pulls its conceits and then plays its hand really well, and then the ending, it flips the last card and catches you really really well. I really dug this one.
Yeah, well, what rating would you give it?
Like a 9 out of 10, pretty high. Yeah.
All right. So of course, CC, I know you're gonna give it a 10. So you can repeat and say yes, this is a 10. But outside of your rating, you can just give your final thoughts on the film, its impact and its influence now and for years to come.
Well, and I think the two things to me that I what's the word? The two things to me that I kind of come back to about this film again and again are that it very much like The Evil Dead. As a creator, it is a very inspiring movie because I think, especially in film school, there's kind of a lot of pressure to not there's very much this pressure in film school. It's like, well, all those genre ideas you have are very nice, but you're in film school and you don't really have the budget to go out and get like a werewolf costume or whatever. So why don't you go for something a little more, something a little easier, something a little cheaper, that kind of thing. But I think with The Descent in particular, Neil Marshall actually shows that you do not need Hollywood budgets to make an effective horror movie. Like you really don't. Like and you don't need to you don't need the budget of an Avengers movie to make a really good horror movie. You really do not. And I think that movies like The Descent really triumph that particular position. And then on top of that, just as appreciating the film, it's one of the most intelligent horror movies. It's like Ricardo was saying, it takes a genius to write stupidity well, right? Like it's such a clever. It's a movie that's clever without trying to, show off how clever it is. It's a movie that is incredibly intelligent it's a movie that's intelligent in the best way, where it doesn't need to show off necessarily. It's a movie that doesn't need to remind you it's intelligent. It just knows that you, by watching it, you'll understand how intelligent it is. And that way it's an incredibly unassuming movie. And obviously it's a masterpiece. Obviously it's terrific. I'm going to quote a film critic who didn't like horror and was quite outspoken about not liking horror, but ranked The Descent as one of the few horror movies that he really, really liked. So, if you will forgive me to quote Roger Ebert, Neil Marshall's The Descent works and plays not only with movie imagery, but with the stuff of myth and dreams as well. It evokes hellish visions from famous paintings, Goya's black paintings of Fuseli's Nightmare, to Gothic gargoyles and Doria's engraving of Dante's Inferno. These almost subliminal references help drive The Descent and give it a powerful mythic energy. It grasps when and how to draw upon these images to create just the right tone of hallucinatory fear, and sets it reverberating in your head. The movie's not pretentious or derivative, it's just uncanny about knowing what to borrow and how to use it. Roger Ebert, 2006.
All right, nice. And yeah, I mean, what better way to conclude this season of Six Reels Deep than a Roger Ebert quote, man? I mean, again, as I said before, one of my primary influences here. So yeah, great way to close things off, man.
I figured that's how it would. I figured that would make it appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So yes, folks, thanks for sticking around for this second season here. Hope you got some great recommendations as far as what to watch. During I'm gonna say this Halloween weekend, because it doesn't just stop at Friday, October 31st. No, we should go up until Sunday, November 2nd, for God's sake, right? Just enjoy the whole weekend. Find some great horror films, watch them, and enjoy yourself, and then move on with your life, right? So that's how it goes. But yes, folks, happy Halloween, safe travels, and yeah, till next year, take care.